The snow fell relentlessly over Port Charles on this unforgiving winter night, transforming the picturesque coastal town into an isolated fortress. Every road leading in or out of the city lay buried under mountains of white, and the blizzard showed no signs of mercy. What had started as a winter weather advisory had evolved into a full-scale emergency, the kind that forced people to take shelter and pray the storm would pass before supplies ran out. The meteorologists had predicted this would be one of the worst storms in a decade. Emergency response teams were stretched thin across the city, managing accidents and responding to calls from residents who had ventured out unprepared for the brutal conditions. Hospitals were on alert for hypothermia cases and accident victims. Shelters opened their doors to the homeless. The entire city had shifted into survival mode, united against a common enemy, the unforgiving winter. But on Spoon Island, something far more sinister than nature's fury was unfolding. At Windermere Castle, perched on Spoon Island like a dark sentinel overlooking the frozen bay, a crisis of an entirely different magnitude was developing in the shadows, while the residents above remained oblivious to the danger beneath their feet. Dr. Britt Westbourne stood trembling in the secret laboratory hidden deep within the castle's lower levels, her hands shaking as she stared at the energy core spinning wildly before her eyes. The massive cylindrical chamber dominated the underground chamber, its crystalline surface pulsing with an otherworldly blue-white light. It was beautiful in its way, a marvel of engineering and scientific achievement. But beauty meant nothing when that achievement was collapsing in real time. The cooling system's red warning lights flickered with increasing frequency like the warnings of a heart monitor flatlined a steady, ominous pulse of impending catastrophe. Britt watched the temperature gauges climbing steadily. 847 degrees, 851 degrees, 856 degrees. Every few seconds another degree. The thermal cascade had begun its inexorable acceleration. The moment everything changed. Britt's fingers flew across the control panel with desperate precision, trying every override code she had ever been taught, but the numbers told a story she could no longer deny. The thermal stabilizers were failing in a cascading sequence, first the primary systems, then the secondary backups. And now even the emergency protocols were beginning to falter. She had watched this scenario play out in theoretical models 100 times during her training, but theory had never prepared her for the suffocating reality of it. She had been trapped in Windermere for months under Cullum Sidwell's watchful eye, her brilliant mind held captive by threats and manipulation to work on this project. She had told herself she could endure it, that she was strong enough to survive whatever came next. But as she stared at the failing readouts, Britt realized that nothing could have prepared her for this. This wasn't just a crisis. This was the end of everything she had feared would happen. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the control station. The hum of the core was changing, becoming higher-pitched, more frantic, as if the machine itself knew what was coming. "The core is destabilizing," she whispered into her communications device, her voice barely steady. Her heart pounded in her chest with such force that she thought it might shatter her ribs. "The cooling matrix is completely compromised. We're looking at a thermal cascade within..." She pulled up the catastrophe prediction model, watching the simulation run its terrible mathematics before her eyes. "Within 45 minutes maximum. After that, the containment field integrity drops exponentially. The core will reach criticality." On the other end of the line, Cullum Sidwell's response came immediately. His voice was ice-cold, calculated, and utterly devoid of any concern for human life. It was the voice of a man who had already made his choice and had no intention of reconsidering. "Lock down all exits." Immediately, he commanded his tone, suggesting this was merely another routine corporate decision to be implemented. "We cannot afford for anyone to discover what we've built here. The project cannot be compromised, Dr. Westbourne. Do you understand me?" Britt felt something die inside her at those words. "Sir, you don't understand what you're asking. If that core ruptures, if the containment field fails completely, we're not talking about a localized explosion. We're talking about a nuclear event. The fallout will spread far beyond this island. Port Charles. Thousands of people, children, families, they have no idea what's happening beneath their feet." "I am completely aware of the potential consequences," Sidwell interrupted coldly, and the absolute indifference in his voice was perhaps the most chilling thing Britt had ever heard, which is precisely why the exits remain sealed. No one leaves this island until this situation is resolved. No one talks. No exceptions. You have your orders, Doctor. The communication line went silent. Britt stood alone in the laboratory. The only sound, the relentless hum of the failing reactor and the distant howl of the blizzard far above. The man who won't give up. In the upper corridors of Windermere, Jason Morgan was already moving with the precision and focus of someone who had spent years operating outside the system, a man, accustomed to impossible odds and impossible choices. He had arrived at the castle hours earlier on what should have been a routine visit, but his instincts had been screaming warnings from the moment he'd crossed the threshold. He'd sensed Britt's distress the moment he noticed her prolonged absence from the main halls. During their last conversation, there had been a slight hesitation in her voice, the kind of hesitation that betrayed someone carrying a terrible secret. Her eyes had darted away when he asked about her recent work assignments. Jason had learned long ago to read people the way a hunter reads tracks in snow, interpreting the subtle signs that revealed hidden truths. And everything about Britt screamed danger, not the kind of danger that came from enemies, but the kind that came from being trapped. He had pressed for answers, but she had deflected with practiced ease, insisting everything was fine even as her hands trembled slightly. That was when Jason had decided to investigate on his own. The sealed doors on the lower levels of Windermere weren't supposed to exist, or at least they weren't supposed to be sealed. Jason had been inside the castle enough times to know its layout, and these security measures were new, sophisticated, and very deliberately placed to prevent anyone from going deeper into the castle's secrets. When he discovered the reinforced doors, he didn't hesitate for even a moment. He activated his communication device. "Britt, talk to me. What's happening down there?" Static met his question for several long seconds. When Britt's voice finally came through, it was strained, weighted with barely suppressed panic. "Jason," her voice was small, frightened. "You shouldn't be trying to reach me. You need to leave. Right now." "Not happening," he said flatly. His fingers were already examining the electronic lock mechanism, assessing its vulnerabilities. "I'm coming down. I'm not leaving you in there. Jason, don't." Her response came immediately panicked and desperate. "You can't get through. The security systems are beyond anything you can override. Sidwell has locked down the entire sublevel. Just listen to me. You need to leave the island immediately. Get off Spoon Island and contact General Hospital. Tell them to evacuate the surrounding areas and warn the city. If you stay here, you'll just become another casualty, and that won't help anyone." "I'm breaking through," he said flatly, already moving toward the reinforced security door with the methodical determination that had carried him through 1,000 impossible situations. He was a man who had stared down mobsters without flinching, who had infiltrated criminal organizations, who had faced terrorists and the darkest corners of human nature without backing down. A locked door would not be the obstacle that stopped him now. He worked on the lock with professional efficiency, his mind already calculating the structural integrity of the doorframe, identifying the pressure points where force would be most effective. But even Jason Morgan's legendary resolve met its match when he heard what came next. The sound of Britt's voice, hollow and trembling with a resignation that went far deeper than fear, cut through him like a blade through flesh. "The impossible choice. The thermal core has gone critical," Britt announced, her voice barely above a whisper. She had passed beyond panic into a strange, crystalline clarity that only emerges when someone fully confronts the impossible and accepts it as inevitable. "The backup systems completely failed 6 minutes ago. Jason, I'm not being dramatic or pessimistic. The primary cooling matrix is destroyed. The redundancies are all offline. Every single failsafe I've attempted to activate has failed. There is no way to stop the cascade anymore. The energy released will exceed critical mass in approximately 38 minutes. Jason paused mid-movement, his fist against the sealed door dropping slowly to his side. His jaw tightened. "Then we find another way. There's always another way, Britt. There has to be." But Britt had already begun typing commands into her keyboard with trembling fingers, executing a sequence she had hoped, prayed she would never have to use. The keys clicked beneath her touch like a countdown to Judgment Day. "There is one option," she said quietly, her voice taking on the flat affect of someone who has already made peace with the unthinkable. "One final manual override that exists as a last resort. There's a core stabilization sequence that can be activated from inside the reactor chamber itself. If we can trigger it manually, it would interrupt the cascade. It would buy time, maybe 45 minutes, maybe an hour, long enough for everyone to evacuate Port Charles and get to higher ground. Long enough for the city to survive. Then do it, Jason said immediately, his voice carrying absolute certainty. Activate it now. It's not that simple, Jason. Britt's voice broke slightly. I can't just input the command remotely. The failsafes are designed with complexity that prevents accidental activation. Someone has to physically go into that chamber. Someone has to manually input the sequence from the control panel inside the reactor room itself. They have to be in there when the cascade reaches critical intensity. Jason understood immediately what she was saying. Then we do it together. We both go in, we both input the sequence? No. Britt's response was immediate and absolute. The chamber can only safely accommodate one person. And there's another problem, Jason. Once the cascade begins in earnest, the radiation levels spike exponentially. The radiation shielding in the chamber is designed to protect against normal operating temperatures. When the core reaches criticality, whoever is inside won't be able to get back out. The radiation exposure alone, the thermal intensity, it would be lethal within minutes. Jason's hand clenched into a fist against the sealed door. No, absolutely not. There has to be another way. There has to be some other solution we haven't considered yet. There isn't, Britt said softly. Her voice had steadied now, accepting the terrible mathematics of their situation. I've run every calculation, every scenario, every possible combination of variables. The answer is always the same. One person has to stay. One person sacrifices and thousands live. That's the equation we're faced with, Jason. That's the choice we have to make. Silence stretched between them, heavy, suffocating, impossible to fill with anything except the weight of what was being asked. When heroes are made, the silence between them stretched like a chasm, heavy with the weight of terrible mathematics that couldn't be negotiated or rewritten. One person sacrificing themselves, accepting certain death, meant that thousands could live. It meant their families would wake tomorrow. It meant children would go to school, patients would recover in hospitals. Ordinary people would have the chance to experience ordinary moments they would never have if this core failed. But two people trying to go in meant failure. It meant confusion, hesitation, both trying to save each other, and in the end, both trapped, both dying, and the failsafes left untriggered. 2 deaths instead of 1. Thousands of deaths instead of a single sacrifice. The equation was brutal in its simplicity, and it left absolutely no room for heroic's clever solutions, or the kind of happy endings that only existed in stories. This was mathematics written in human lives. I'm sorry, Britt said softly, and her voice finally broke. Jason, I'm so sorry you got pulled into this. This was supposed to be my burden, not yours. This was my choice when I got involved with Sidwell. It doesn't have to be your burden alone, Jason said, his voice rough. But then another sound interrupted them, a crackle of static, and then a voice came through the communication channel. It was rough, tired, but absolutely unwavering in its determination. The voice of someone who had heard the entire exchange and had already made their decision. A third voice. A third player. Someone who had been listening all along.